I told you not to let her move in. I hadn't even stepped inside yet, but that one sentence from my daughter-in-law, floating coldly out from the living room, was enough to freeze me in place. I stood still on the front porch, my hand gripping the suitcase handle, one foot resting on the edge of the welcome mat. David, my son, didn't respond. Or maybe he did, quietly. But the worst part was, he didn't defend me. I took a long breath, forced my legs to move forward as if I hadn't heard a thing. My smile, weak and trembling, appeared like a shield. David stepped out of the kitchen, glanced at me, and said, "Why did you bring so much stuff? My room's already cramped." No hug, no welcome, Mom. No, did you have a safe trip? Just a comment, cold and measured, about my luggage. I swallowed hard. Lisa walked past without a second glance, still chopping onions, no greeting, no warmth. I told myself maybe they're just tired, maybe I'm being too sensitive. My name is Clara Peterson. I'm 68 years old, a widow. Just 3 months ago, I recovered from a mild stroke and have been battling arthritis that worsens with every cold front. I used to live in New Jersey, a house I stayed in for 34 years, where I raised my son and loved my husband deeply. After his passing, the house became unbearably quiet. David had said, "Come live with us, Mom. Florida's warm, the kids are loud, you won't feel alone anymore." I believed him. I sold the house, filled with memories, packed up my savings, and helped David pay for this new home. I thought I was entering a new chapter, one where I'd hear laughter again, share meals, be needed. Instead, I was given a fold-up bed in the corner of the storage room. Shelves were still packed with old paint cans, boxes, wires, and rags. No picture frame, no fresh linens, no window. It felt like I was squatting, not settling in. That evening, I helped Lisa set the dinner table. 4 plates were laid out, one for David, Lisa, and their 2 kids. No one asked if I'd eaten, no extra chair. I scooped myself some soup into a plastic bowl and stood by the sink, quietly eating like a stranger in her own home. I tried to dismiss it. They just need time, I told myself. But deep inside, something had already begun to crack. Later that night, while folding my clothes inside that storage room, I overheard Lisa again, soft but cutting. "I don't want to see her around the house every night." David didn't reply. I didn't hear him tell her to stop. I didn't hear him say, "She's my mother." I sat down on the fold-up bed and pulled a thin blanket over myself. My first night in this new house. I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The house, the one I helped pay for, suddenly felt colder than any New Jersey winter. I once was the warmth of a home, the woman who held her son through every fever, the one who sacrificed vacations, sleep, even dreams, so he could have his. Now I was just a guest, a burden, in a place that I thought would be my last safe haven. Ever since I moved into this house, everything has felt modern, spacious, and clean. Except me. I didn't belong here, not really. I couldn't pinpoint when that feeling settled in. Maybe it was when I heard Lisa's voice the first day. "I told you not to let her move in." Maybe it was when David glanced at my suitcase and said, "Why did you bring so much stuff?" Or maybe it was in the little things, the tiny, invisible moments that chip away at your dignity. The morning after I arrived, I woke up early, as I always did, hoping to make breakfast, the way I'd done for decades. I stepped into the kitchen, but Lisa was already there. She didn't turn around. Her voice was firm, eyes fixed on the coffee machine. "Please don't use the coffee maker." "It's complicated." I smiled faintly and nodded. It wasn't about the machine. I knew. It was about not touching anything. Later that day, I headed upstairs to grab laundry, but David stopped me halfway. Mom, don't use the upstairs bathroom, okay? Lisa keeps her stuff there, and the kids need it too. You can use the one downstairs. I said, okay, just like that. No questions. I've always been good at obedience. So I started to fade into the background. I washed dishes, folded clothes, took out trash. I kept quiet, never turned on the TV, never lingered in the living room. I moved through the house like a breeze no one noticed, and no one missed. At dinner, there were 4 chairs. I stood the first night. I stood the second. On the third, I quietly dragged a folding stool and sat at the small side table by the wall. No one asked me to, but something in Lisa's glance made it clear. 4 seats were enough. One day I made honey-roasted chicken, David's favorite growing up. As I carried it to the table, Lisa frowned. "Oh, did you use the oven? Did you set the right temperature?" "I just cleaned it yesterday." I nodded. No one tried the chicken. I kept smiling, but the lump in my throat was too big to swallow. I began hearing things, late at night, behind closed doors. Things people only say when they forget you exist. Like the night Lisa was on the phone in the kitchen. It's exhausting, honestly. Having an old person live with you, it changes the whole atmosphere. I stood in the hallway, swallowed by the dark. My hand shook, not from age, from knowing. An old person? I used to be the reason this family stayed together. Now I was the problem. Every night I lay on my fold-out bed in the storage room. The room they gave me. No nightlight, no window. Just the smell of paint cans and forgotten boxes. Once I stayed up reading. The door creaked open. David poked his head in. "Mom, can you turn off the light?" "It's shining into the kids' room." I nodded, switched it off, and that's when it hit me. I, the woman who had once been the light in this home, was now being asked to turn it off. No yelling, no confrontation, just slow, silent erasure. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being erased piece by piece. I stopped counting the days. I no longer woke up early to make breakfast, not because I was lazy, but because no one needed me to. I became the last one to leave my room in the morning and the first one to disappear after dinner. Everything I did was quiet, invisible. I learned to walk without making noise, to wash dishes without splashing, to open drawers without a sound, to exist without leaving a trace. No one asked me to do that, but no one stopped me either. Maybe I had expected too much? Maybe. This was all my fault. I was the one who rushed to sell my house in New Jersey. The one Henry and I built a life in for 34 years. I was the one who transferred all the money to David without asking questions. I trusted him. I trusted his promise. "You won't be alone, Mom. You just need to rest now." And I believed him so deeply, I left behind everything, my garden, my neighbors, my independence, to chase what I thought would be a warm, peaceful future. But that future now felt like a storage room with no windows and a silence that pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I started to question myself. Am I asking for too much? Maybe having an old woman in the house really is a burden. Maybe I really am the problem. I looked at myself in the mirror, gray hair in wild patches, dark circles under my eyes, skin like crumpled parchment. I saw a woman who once held her family together, now shrinking herself smaller each day, just to be allowed to stay. I remembered the old days, when David was a little boy. Every morning he'd run into my room. "Mom, I've got a math test today." And I'd jump up, make him warm milk, pack his bag, kiss his forehead. Don't forget your jacket, it's chilly. Now that same boy, now a grown man, doesn't even ask me if I've eaten. One afternoon, I slipped in the downstairs bathroom. My knee hit the sink hard. I didn't cry out. I didn't call for help. I cleaned the blood. I bandaged it myself. No one noticed. No one asked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the pain, but because of one haunting thought that kept circling in my mind. If I were to disappear one day, would anyone in this house even notice? I tried to shake it off, but it kept coming back, louder, heavier, because deep down I knew I had given my entire life to hold this family together. And now this family was erasing me. Not with harsh words, not by slamming doors, but with absence, with cold glances, with being left out of every conversation. I, who once stirred every pot, folded every blanket, kissed every wound, now was just a shadow, stepping aside so others could pass. I used to think motherhood meant giving everything, no questions asked. But no one ever told me that even love needs boundaries. Because without them, one day you'll give so much of yourself away, there'll be nothing left of you. And that's where I am now, sitting in the corner of a house I helped build, feeling like a guest in a life that used to be mine. I used to think I was slowly disappearing because of age, or because I was no longer useful. But then one seemingly ordinary morning revealed something far more painful, far more brutal. That morning, the house was quiet. Lisa had taken the kids to school, and David wasn't back yet from the clinic. I was outside hanging laundry when the landline rang. No one else was around, so I picked it up. A polite woman's voice came through the line, professional and measured. "Good morning, may I speak with Mrs. Clara Peterson? I'm calling from Riverline Bank to verify a recent mortgage loan in your name, totaling $85,000. I froze. "I'm sorry, I haven't taken out any loan," I said, my voice already shaking. A pause, then she asked, "Can you confirm the property address, 4419 Pine Avenue, Florida?" My throat tightened. That was this house, the house I helped pay for, by selling the only home I had ever known. "Our records show a valid signature under your name, and the loan was secured using this property as collateral." I don't remember how I ended the call. All I know is that my hands had gone cold. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear myself breathe. Someone had forged my signature, and not just anyone. Only one person in this house had access to my documents. Only one person could have done it, and the worst part was, he was my son. I sat down on the couch, staring blankly out the front window. The morning breeze gently stirred the trees, but inside me, a storm had already begun. Memories came rushing back, one after another. The day David asked me to quickly sign a bank confirmation form. Lisa standing close, holding the pen for me. The missing documents from my personal folder. I hadn't read the fine print. I hadn't asked questions. I had trusted them. I had trusted my son never to use my name, my worth as currency. But I wasn't a mother anymore in his eyes. I was a tool, a wallet, a walking signature. I didn't cry, not this time. Pain had reached a level where tears no longer came. I felt like a torn piece of paper, no longer whole, but not quite thrown away. I went upstairs, opened the drawer where I kept my old documents. The home deed, Henry's will, our marriage certificate. They were all still there, but they no longer meant anything. Not after what I now knew. I sat in front of the mirror and stared at the woman looking back at me. And for the first time in a long while, I saw someone who was waking up. No longer just a victim, no longer afraid. In my reflection, I saw a woman who had finally realized, my son didn't just betray my trust, he gambled with my future for his own gain. I knew then I couldn't let this continue. I had to protect what little of my life remained, if not for me, then for the memory of my husband, and for the dignity I had buried too long beneath silence. That night, I sat at my desk with a small notebook and began writing down everything I could remember. Dates, documents, every detail. I needed to build the story step by step because I knew I wasn't going to stay silent much longer. At sunrise, I pulled out an old address book from the bottom drawer, flipped through faded pages until I found the name I hadn't said aloud in years, Richard Marlowe, Henry's attorney. I picked up the phone. "Hello, Richard. This is Clara. I need to speak with you, and I think it's time I stop being quiet. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I didn't confront anyone. I simply sat alone in that cluttered storage room with a pen and my old notebook. Each page I flipped used to hold pieces of my life, but this time I wasn't journaling. I was making a plan, not for revenge, but to take back what they thought I had forgotten was mine." The next morning, I called Richard Marlowe, the attorney who had once been Henry's friend, the man who handled our old house's paperwork and helped Henry draft his will. I hadn't spoken to him in over 8 years. But when I said, "Richard, I need to see you. This time it's about me," he was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Same office. Come at 3. I arrived right on time. I brought everything: copies of the house deed, bank records, my notes about the forms David had handed me to sign. I told Richard everything: the mortgage I never agreed to, the documents I was pushed to sign without understanding. The silence that felt more suffocating than any argument, the look in my son's eyes that had long stopped seeing me as a mother and started seeing me as an opportunity. Richard didn't look surprised, but he was quiet for a long time. Then he opened his laptop, pulled up some records, and said, "You're still a legal co-owner of the house, Clara. If we can prove this signature wasn't yours and that you weren't present at the bank, we have grounds for a fraud case." I exhaled. It wasn't relief exactly. It was weight shifting. I still had a name. I still had rights. I hadn't lost everything. After that meeting, I changed. I opened a new bank account under my maiden name, Clara Evans. It was a name I'd given up long ago when I became a wife and mother, but now I was reclaiming it, just as I was reclaiming myself. I began transferring my remaining savings into the new account. Quietly, without a trace, I gathered my valuables, documents, jewelry, old family photos, even my wedding ring, and sealed them in a cloth pouch. Then I asked a friend from church to hold it for me. I bought a small voice recorder. Every time David or Lisa came near, I'd turn it on, slip it into my pocket or under a cushion, not because I expected them to insult me outright, but because I refused to remain powerless. I kept writing in my notebook, dates, times, conversations, behaviors. I became an observer, sharp, controlled, calm. One evening, Lisa asked casually, "Mom, you've been going out a lot lately. Everything okay?" I smiled. "Just church, doing a little more praying these days." It wasn't a lie. I really was praying, but not for them to love me. I was praying for the strength not to flinch anymore. Richard drafted a formal complaint to the bank, challenging the forged signature and the loan. At the same time, he began preparing a new will for me, as I'd requested. David and Lisa were no longer listed in anything. If they ever found out, I knew they'd explode. But I didn't care anymore. I no longer lived off guilt or hope. I lived by one truth: Those who harm me no longer get a say in my future. I started sleeping again, just a little, but deeper, because for the first time in months, I felt like I was walking towards something instead of away. No one suspected a thing. I still played the quiet mother, the aging woman who never says no. Only I and my thickening notebook knew I was rebuilding my life, piece by piece. Not loudly, not dramatically, just with resolve. And this time I wasn't letting go. I didn't take much with me when I left that house. Just one suitcase of clothes, a folder of documents, an old wedding photo, and the notebook I had been filling over the last few months. That was it. But it was enough to begin again, not as a wife, not as a mother, not as the old lady living off her son, but just me, Clara. I rented a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building near the lake. No elevator, no smart doorbells, but plenty of morning sunlight through the kitchen window and the soft sound of sparrows on the balcony at dusk. And most importantly, a silence that felt real. No one watching over my shoulder. No footsteps judging my every move. No feeling that I was somehow intruding in a place I helped build. Just me. And I wasn't lonely. On my first morning, I brewed a cup of hot tea and sat on a wooden chair on the balcony, watching sunlight scatter across the lake. I sat there for a long time, doing nothing. And oddly enough, I didn't feel empty. I felt full enough for a new day where I owed nothing to anyone. I spent the first week cleaning the apartment, not just to tidy it, but to clear out my own mind, rearranging drawers, folding towels, scrubbing corners. It felt like I was making space for something new inside me. I hung up the old wedding photo on the one clean white wall in the living room, not to dwell in the past, but to honor the man who once loved me as I was. Henry, I've finally stepped out of the shadows. I began writing again, not for anyone to read, just for myself. Simple words, honest thoughts, sometimes questions I couldn't answer. When did I start disappearing? Do I truly forgive David? Can I learn to love life again? I didn't need answers right away, but I wasn't afraid of the questions anymore. I joined a crafts class at the community center, filled with women like me, hands a little shaky but eyes still sharp. Some knitted, some painted ceramics. Others, like me, were simply learning how to begin again. One afternoon during watercolor class, I painted a quiet scene. A woman sitting by a window, holding a cup of tea, her face turned gently toward the light. She wasn't smiling, but in her eyes was something firm. "Is that you?" the instructor asked, tilting her head. I looked at the painting and nodded. That's me, after I stopped needing anyone's permission to be myself. At night, I started writing letters, not to the past, but to the future. Dear Clara, if one day you start to feel weak, remember this. You once walked away from a place that dimmed your light, and because of that, you never have to fear the dark again. I folded the letter and tucked it into the middle of my notebook. For the first time, I wasn't writing out of sadness. I was writing out of life. I knew that evening would come. There was no avoiding it, no delaying it. I had lived in silence for too long to believe that silence changes people. It doesn't. It only gives them space to keep taking. 6 p.m. sharp. I placed a stack of documents on the dinner table, the very spot where I had set plates for months, without a single thank you. David and Lisa had just returned from the supermarket. They stopped when they saw the papers. Lisa narrowed her eyes. "What's all this?" I didn't answer right away. I looked straight into David's eyes. For the first time, without lowering mine. These are copies of the forged mortgage agreement, handwriting analysis of the fake signature, the authorization letter I never wrote, and recordings of the day you handed me those papers to sign. There's also a bank account I never opened. I've already met with a lawyer. The bank will receive a formal complaint this week. David turned pale but tried to keep his voice steady. Mom, what are you saying? This is a misunderstanding. You're overthinking. Lisa stepped in, her voice sharper. You recorded your own son? You brought a lawyer into family matters? Is this really necessary? I kept my hands on my lap, steady, firm. My voice didn't shake. I've lived like a ghost in this house, a house I helped pay for. I've been treated like a wallet, a walking signature. Not once have either of you looked at me like a human being. I pulled out a USB drive and a sealed envelope from my bag. These are the recordings. One copy is with my lawyer. Another will be sent if needed. This letter here revokes any claim you think you have over what's legally mine. David slammed his hand on the table. Are you trying to kick us out of the house? You're not that kind of person, Mom. I stood up. For the first time, I stood tall in front of my son, not meek, not apologetic. No, I'm just returning to the person I used to be. I'm not the shadow that lives quietly in your house. I'm the woman who sacrificed everything, and I refuse to be exploited any longer. Lisa exhaled, scoffing. You're tearing this family apart. I looked at her, and for once, my eyes weren't sad. They were clear. Families don't break when someone speaks the truth. They break when someone treats love like leverage and thinks no one will notice. I walked to the corner of the room. My old suitcase was already packed, quietly over several nights. I picked it up, calmly, no rush, no panic. David stammered, Mom, where are you going? You can't just leave like this. I turned back, my voice light but firm. I'm not leaving. I'm returning to myself. And this house, David, it was never yours. I merely allowed you to live in it. That permission is now revoked. I placed the USB and envelope on the table. On the front of the envelope, I had written, To the two people who once called me Mom. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt peaceful. The door closed behind me. Outside, the rain had started, a soft, steady drizzle. But inside me, there was only light. For the first time in years, I no longer felt like an afterthought. I am Clara Peterson, and I just reclaimed my life. One early autumn morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The first sunlight filtered through my sheer white curtains, golden and soft like warm honey. I poured myself a cup of hot tea and stepped onto the balcony, the place I sit every day, facing the still, quiet lake. But today felt different, not because of the weather, but because deep inside I knew something in me had quietly closed. It's been nearly 2 months since I walked out of that old house. No phone calls, no apologies, no messages from David. At first, I thought the silence would hurt, but then I realized pain only lingers when you feed it. And I had stopped feeding it. I let it drift away with the wind. Just like the old days, I no longer chase. I began writing more, not just for myself, but for the women I'd met in my painting class, at the supermarket, in church, women who smiled quietly, spoke gently, and lived as if their existence needed someone's permission. I understood them, because I used to be one of them. One afternoon, walking home from my craft class, I passed a little bookshop tucked in the corner of a quiet street. I stepped in, picked up a brown leather journal, and flipped open the first page. I thought, if I could leave just one last message inside this book, what would it be? That evening, sitting at my desk with the lamp dimmed low, I wrote, "To the women who feel like they've lost their worth, look at your hands, the same hands that cooked thousands of meals, cleaned countless rooms, wiped away tears from faces that once needed you. Look into your eyes, the ones that stayed up late, cried in silence, watched your children grow up, walk away, and sometimes forget you. Ask yourself, if you can love others that deeply, why is it so hard to love yourself?" I closed the notebook and placed it on my shelf. I don't know who will read it, but I know I gave something real, not to be returned, but because I have nothing left to hide. My evenings took on a new ritual. I cook a meal just for me, arrange the table with care, light a small candle, and play soft instrumental music. I eat slowly, savoring each bite, not out of routine, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for still being here, for having breath, for having the right to choose. No one calls my name in the middle of dinner. No one knocks to ask for money. No one rushes, questions, or criticizes. And I realized solitude and freedom are not enemies. They are simply two sides of the same gift, if we learn how to unwrap it. I closed my journal that night and opened the windows wide. The evening breeze swept in, cool and earthy, carrying the scent of damp leaves and whispering trees. I took a deep breath. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was starting over. I felt like I was simply living, not to be loved, not to be forgiven, not to be acknowledged as good enough. I live because I know I am worthy. I don't need to belong to anyone. I belong to myself, and for once, that is more than enough.